Wes Walker has a very simple question. He says, Robin Hood, hero, villain, why? Is it Atlas Shrugged where there's a gigantic monologue about Robin Hood, how he's the worst man in history, robbing from the rich and giving to the poor? Here's what I think is interesting about Robin Hood, as whether or not he's a hero or a villain. If I had to describe Robin Hood today in America, I'd say he's a villain. Robbing from the rich and giving to the poor. This is the whole entire point, Wes. It's the whole entire point of the question is, in America, in a free market economy where there is legislated equality of opportunity and really remarkable, astonishing progress in terms of mentally, spiritually accepting everyone as having an equal opportunity. Then in a free market society such as ours, then Robin Hood is a villain. Because in a free market society, I believe that wealth is generated. It's created out of thin air. It's not a zero-sum game. And then and the people who are wealthy, unless they're second or third generation, and many of them as well, but people who are spectacularly wealthy worked for it. They came up with something of enormous value. Bill Gates is an example. I think probably Steve Jobs is the best example. Look, I mean, Steve Jobs is worth billions and billions of dollars because he had the vision to come up with this. Socialists and progressives will tell you that, the total wealth of Bill Gates should have been divided by the number of people it takes to make a cell phone. So in other words, Bill Gates, if you really want to talk to an actual progressive, an actual communist, one of these people really believes what they say, they'll tell you that Steve Jobs essentially should make the same as the guy who builds the phone, right? No more and no less. Now, most people don't believe that, but most people think that, maybe Steve Jobs is way too rich, but you can't put a limit on what he's done. This device, if this were just a toy, it would be a remarkable device. But it's not. It adds enormous productivity to the day, and it steals a fair amount of productivity as well. But I've never been bored ever since I've had an iPhone. And it costs a lot of money, and I make a decision to pay for it, and this is the third one I've owned, I guess. So if Robin Hood were to come along today and steal Steve Jobs' money and give it to poor people, especially poor people who are on welfare, he would be taking the rewards for the hard work, because it was hard work, and persistence. That's one thing I've learned about running a business is it's just persistence. You wake up some days and just think, oh my God, really? Everything's on fire. Everything's on fire, and everything's gone wrong, and things cost, and there's a bill you hadn't expected, and there's this, and your rent, and everything's on fire all the time. And the one thing I never really realized about the running the business part of it is just the persistence of getting up every day and saying, all right, well, you got to put these fires out now. So when you talk about stealing from a guy who had to go through what Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak had to do in order to become the billionaires they became, it's not just. It's not fair to take the rewards of their years and years and years and years of hard work and effort and vision and imagination and persistence and belief in themselves and just hand it off to people who never had any of that. And in many cases now, after we get to the third generation of welfare, people who not only have never had any desire to do any work, but really have never done any work in their lives. There's entire generations of Americans now who've been so ruined by this cradle-to-grave entitlement that they don't know anything about hard work. They don't know anything about the feeling you get from working hard and getting a paycheck or a reward, starting a business and seeing revenues just appear in the bank when people voluntarily give you money. They voluntarily make a deposit into your bank account. It's amazing. It's really amazing, and it's a great tragedy. And like any other untapped resource, if we have 20, 30, 40 million people on welfare, I'm certainly not suggesting that all of them are Steve Jobs, or even some of them are Steve Jobs or whoever else. But there are some people out there who could have been world changers, could have been people who really would have improved the quality of life all across this world. And they never got the chance because they'd been born into a world where they'd been handed the bare bones minimum to live. So Robin Hood today would be a villain. But the interesting question is, was Robin Hood a villain at the time Robin Hood was Robin Hood? And I actually don't think he was. I think Robin Hood was a hero in the period in which Robin Hood was set. And this is what I find interesting about the question. How can it be that Robin Hood, in the time of Robin Hood, in the time of Richard the Lionheart, this would be about the 1200s, somewhere in that ballpark, how can it be that the same guy with the same actions can be a hero in 1200 AD and be a villain in 2010 or 2015 AD? He hasn't changed. He hasn't changed because he's fictional. He hasn't changed. His story hasn't changed. He was a hero back then, I think, because, and I think this is the entire point, he was a hero in the Middle Ages because in the Middle Ages there was not a lot of wealth produced at all. And the wealth that was produced was commandeered by force by powerful people who often inherited their power through bloodlines, not through their own effort. And whether they inherited it through their own effort or not is irrelevant. The fact is that there's very, very little wealth actually produced, and what wealth was produced was taken at the point of a sword from the people that produced the wealth, the peasants. And the peasants had no chance of moving up, essentially none. There's probably a minuscule chance that one or two of them could have found themselves squires, and maybe through some miracle combination of good luck and personal heroism and effort, might have found themselves knighted and slowly brought their family into the nobility where they could steal and pillage all they wanted to as well. So really, when you get to the bottom of the question, Wes, it comes down to an idea that I'm going to term lubrication. Slipperiness. How slippery is your society? In other words, when you hear about income inequality in America, we still find ourselves using these terms. Oh, these are the less fortunate. He's not fortunate. These people are very fortunate. These people are unfortunate. And they make it sound as if the wealth fairy just flew in certain windows and tapped certain people on the shoulders and didn't tap others. That's just not true. It is absolutely true that you are born into a wealthy family or a poor family or a middle-class family. That is just sheer random luck. There's nothing you can do about that. But here in America, at least prior to the last several years or decade or two, we had, by design, the slipperiest, most lubricated society in the history of the world. In fact, when you get right down to it, the country was designed for that. It was designed to be economically slippery. That mobility and was built into the system, and that all of the legal and jurisprudence kind of aspects of the Constitution and the system of laws and the system of government were designed specifically to stop powerful people from preventing common people from making money. It's really what the Constitution's about. It's designed to stop the elites from letting the common man make some money. And when you talk about the American dream, when we talk about making money, this is always this terrible thing is ascribed to us. He's just in it for the money. It's like, well, yeah. The money is what allows you to purchase the rewards. The rewards are your own house, and your own house means that you don't have to worry about eviction. In your own house, you have pride in ownership. You can invest in it. It's an investment. You want to put a pool in. You want to work harder than you normally would have to pay your bills. If you want to do extra work and build a pool into your house, not only do you get to enjoy the pool, but the value of your investment has risen. So when you talk about the American dream is the viscosity of allowing individual people to move up through hard work. And if you have a viscous, that's the word I was looking for, if you have a viscous, mobile society, then the ethics of Robin Hood change. If everybody is born to peasantry or nobility, and you cannot change it through your own efforts, if you are permanently locked into a state of poverty from which no amount of hard work will ever save you, or conversely born into a world of nobility through which no amount of laziness or mendacity or vileness will ever lower you, then Robin Hood does become an agent of justice. He becomes basically saying these people are working and they're not receiving their reward. They're not receiving a reward commensurate with their work. And the people who aren't working, the people who are pointing swords at other people and taking the work of the peasants by force, are getting rich. But they're not getting rich through work. They're getting rich through coercion. And that's really what it comes down to. So Robin Hood in the 1200s is a hero because he's redistributing wealth. You probably never thought you'd hear me say that, but in the 1200s in England, there was no way to become wealthy other than to redistribute the wealth. They're making very little wealth of their own, and the wealth that was being produced by the peasantry was taken at the point of a sword. In America, in the 20th century, certainly, and in the first part of the 21st century, hard work is rewarded, and you are not locked into a position of poverty or a position of wealth. We talk a lot about people bootstrapping themselves up from poverty, and one of the things that we don't talk about much is how many rich people become poor. And if you really want to look at that, the best way to look at it is to look at the second or third generation of genuinely rich people, the third generation Carnegies or the third generation Vanderbilts or the third generation Scrantons or any of these guys. I put up on Facebook today part one of an interview with a guy who wrote a book called The Myth of the Robber Barons, a guy named Bert Fulsom. And he showed how many of these so-called robber barons were in fact market entrepreneurs who did enormous good for the public, lowered prices by a factor of 10, in some cases by a factor of 100. So what he also looked at was you get a guy like Andrew Carnegie who comes to America with, $14 or something from Scotland, becomes one of the richest men in the world. And yet, when you look at generations, second or third or fourth generations, all the Carnegies or the Scrantons, I think the Scrantons he looked at a little more carefully. Third generation, second generation, but third generation people, really all they do is just spend money that was made by their father or their grandfather. And that money just gets spent out, and next thing you know, these people die, if not in poverty, then in mediocrity. They lower their station. It's kind of like a dune that's piled up by the efforts of one person, and then the sand just gets blown away and flattened out again. So I think it's a really interesting question, and the ethics of whether Robin Hood is a hero or a villain are based upon the environment in which he operates. If it's an environment where hard work is rewarded, and therefore you become rich through hard work, innovation, vision, and providing people something that they want and that they voluntarily give their own hard work up for in terms of money, then taking from that person is stealing. It's vile. It's stealing. It's stealing that person's brilliance or hard work or persistence or whatever. If, on the other hand, if work is being taken at the point of a sword from people who have little and given just even less, even to the point of death, basically, at the point of a sword to somebody who not only didn't earn it but doesn't deserve it, then Robin Hood is a hero. It's an interesting question. Moving on.